I was 7 when it happened, and I still remember the smell of the living room, something like warm dust and the plastic wheels of my red toy car. It was just another normal day. I mean really normal. The kind of day where nothing strange is supposed to happen. I dropped my backpack on the couch the way I always do, even though my dad keeps telling me to hang it by the door. I never remember. I just threw it there and sat on the floor, pushing my toy cars around, making little engine sounds with my mouth. You know when you're a kid, and the world feels small and safe? That's what it felt like. Tiny, warm, ordinary. My dad was in the kitchen. I could hear him messing with the coffee machine. He likes his coffee really strong, the kind that makes the whole house smell like morning, even when it's afternoon. He was humming something too, a song I didn't know, but I remember thinking it made the kitchen sound happy. Everything felt kind of okay, the way Tuesdays usually do when I have gym class and have to pretend I like running. And then it happened. At first it was just this fuzzy feeling behind my eyes, like when you stand up too fast and the whole room does a little wobble. I blinked and thought it would go away, but it didn't. It got heavier. The floor didn't feel steady anymore. I tried to keep playing, but my hands felt weird, like they weren't mine. And then my chest. It hurt. Not like when you fall and scrape your knee. This was different. It was deep, sharp, like someone squeezing the middle of me with a fist, too strong for a kid. I opened my mouth to call my dad. I swear I tried, but no sound came out, just this shaky breath that didn't feel right at all. My red car slipped from my fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a clack I'll never forget. It sounded louder than it should have been, loud enough for my dad to notice. He turned, I saw his face change. Grown-ups have a different kind of scared, a scarier kind because they're the ones who are supposed to keep everything normal. And when they panic, the whole world feels like it breaks. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened like he wanted to shout my name but couldn't get it out fast enough. Then he ran. I remember the sound of his footsteps hard, fast, shaking the floor a little. He scooped me up, and my whole body felt like a puppet with its strings cut. My head fell sideways, my arms dangled. I could barely see because the ceiling lights were too bright, stabbing into my eyes. Everything sounded far away, like he was shouting through a long tunnel underwater. He tried to keep his voice strong, but it cracked anyway. Stay with me, please. I wanted to, I really did, but my body wasn't listening to me anymore. He laid me on the floor. The wood felt cold against my back. I saw him grab the phone. His fingers were shaking so badly, I thought he might drop it. I heard him say, "My son, please hurry." Then his voice broke the way paper tears. I didn't know dads could sound like that. My legs twitched, then stopped. My arms felt heavy, and something inside me slipped. Like when you let go of a balloon and it just floats up without you. Everything got slower, thicker. The room began tilting, spinning gently like I was on a ride I never wanted to be on. I tried to blink, but even my eyelids felt tired. He touched my face, brushed my hair back. His hands were warm, mine were not. And then the darkness came. But it wasn't the kind of darkness where you close your eyes. It was like falling into a hole with no bottom. My stomach dropped the same way it does on a roller coaster, except it didn't stop. I kept falling. The sound of my dad faded. The room faded. Even my own heartbeat faded until it was just gone. Quiet, too quiet. For a moment, I thought this was what dying felt like, just falling and never landing. But then something changed. The darkness wasn't empty. It had shape, a tunnel. I know people always say that, and if I were older maybe I'd roll my eyes at it. But it was real. It stretched out in front of me, long and dark around the edges, bright at the center. And not bright like a lamp or flashlight. It felt alive, like it was breathing, calling, whispering to me without words. Come here, come closer. I didn't have feet anymore, but I moved anyway. Fast. Faster than I've ever moved in my life. The light got bigger and warmer. And for the first time since the pain started, I wasn't scared. I was curious. Like the way you feel when you open a gift and don't know what's inside, but you think it might be something really, really good. And then I blinked, though I didn't have eyelids. And everything changed. I was floating. Actually floating. Near the ceiling of a place I knew but didn't. A hospital room. The lights were cold and white. People in blue scrubs were moving fast around a little body on a stretcher. It took me a moment to realize the little body was mine. Pale still. Eyes closed. And there was a doctor with 2 shiny pads pressing them to my chest. He shouted clear, and my body jumped. I didn't feel it. I only watched. In the corner of the room, leaning against the wall, was my dad. His shoulders were shaking. His hands covered his face. The nurse beside him tried to calm him down, but he wasn't listening. He made a sound, half scream, half whispered, the kind of sound that gets stuck in your heart and never leaves. I wanted to tell him I was okay. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to shout, "I'm right here." But I couldn't. I didn't have a mouth or a voice. I was just me. A floating me who could only watch him break. The doctors tried again and again. Nothing. I saw one of them look at the clock, then shake his head. That tiny gesture hit me harder than the pain ever did. I looked up not because I meant to, but because something gently pulled my attention. Here on the ceiling wasn't there anymore. Just light. Warm, soft, golden light spilling down like sunlight made of love. And I felt myself rise, not forced, not dragged, just lifted. The way you go toward someone calling you home. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I wasn't scared anymore. The light felt warm before I even touched it, warm, in a way I don't know how to explain. Not like sunlight on your skin, and not like a blanket from the dryer. It was warm on the inside, like something melting the fear right out of me. When I rose into it, it wrapped around me so gently that for a second I forgot I ever had a body that could hurt, or get scared, or stop working. Then everything opened. The darkness behind me folded away like pages in a book, and suddenly I was somewhere else. Somewhere that felt older than anything on earth, but also brand new, like it had just been created a minute ago. It wasn't a room, it wasn't a sky, it wasn't even a place the way places are supposed to be. It was more like stepping into a dream where every color was alive. The first thing I noticed was the blue, not the kind of blue you see in the sky or on crayons. This blue felt like it was glowing from the inside, bright but soft at the same time, and when I looked at it, my chest felt lighter. Then I saw purple, huge waves of purple drifting through the air like clouds made of music. Except they weren't clouds. They moved like they were listening to something. Or maybe I was the one listening. And then the music came. It didn't have words. It didn't even have instruments. It was like if happiness had a sound. Like if love decided to sing. It flowed right through me, not around me. And for a moment, I felt like every part of me, my thoughts, my memories, even the tiny pieces of me I didn't know existed, were glowing along with it. My eyes filled with tears, but not the sad kind. More like when you finally get the thing you asked for on Christmas, but multiplied 1,000 times. I looked down and realized I wasn't standing. I wasn't floating either. I just was. And under me was a river, not water. It looked like silver and gold mixed together, moving slowly, almost breathing. Little sparks of light rose from its surface, drifting upward like tiny fireflies that didn't need wings. I leaned closer and saw something that made me stop breathing, even though I didn't need to breathe here. My reflection, except it wasn't the normal me. Not the me with messy hair and a tiny scar on my chin from when I fell off my bike. This version of me was glowing. Light came out of my skin, my eyes, even my hair. I looked like someone made me out of sunshine, and it felt right. Like this was the real me. And the small, breakable body in the hospital was only a shadow I wore for a little while. When I looked up, I noticed people, lots of them. Men, women, children, even babies walking or dancing or just smiling, as if they were part of the music. But the strange thing was that everyone seemed to know me. When they turned their glowing faces in my direction, they smiled like they'd been waiting for me. It didn't feel weird. It felt like being welcomed home after being gone for too long. Big flowers with petals as tall as me swayed beside the river. Their petals shimmered with colors I don't have names for. When the music rose, the flowers rose too. When it softened, they lowered themselves. They weren't alive like plants on earth. They were more alive, and something made the whole place go quiet. Not silent, just expectant. The music paused the way people pause right before something important happens. Even the flowers tilted slightly, like they were listening. I heard a voice, soft, strong, like a whisper and thunder mixed together. It wasn't behind me, or above me, or anywhere specific. It was everywhere. And when it spoke, it didn't just reach my ears, it reached my whole self. It said my name. Not Ben. Not the name on my homework papers. Not even the name my dad calls me when he is proud, or the nickname my friends gave me at school. This was different. It was the name I didn't even know I had. The one that made every part of me suddenly remember who I was before I was even born. I turned. Slowly. Carefully. My heart, if I still had one beat, like it was waiting for something huge. And then, I saw him. Jesus. I had seen pictures of him before children's Bibles. Paintings? Little statues in my grandma's house, but none of them looked like the person standing in front of me now. He was taller than my dad, with long brown hair and a beard, but those things didn't matter. Not when his eyes were like that. They were deep like the ocean but bright like the sky, and somehow they looked like all the good in the world decided to shine in the same place. He smiled, and when he did, the whole place brightened like someone turned on another sun, but it didn't hurt to look. The warmth in his smile made my chest ache in the best way, like joy that was too big to fit inside me. Before I knew it, I was running, not with legs. I didn't have legs. But I moved toward him the same way you run to your dad when he comes home and you've been waiting all day just to hug him. Jesus opened his arms, and I fell into them. He caught me like he had always been holding me, even when I didn't know it. He ran his hand through my hair, the same way my dad does when I'm scared. Except this touch felt like it fixed places in me I didn't even know were broken. I've known you since before you were born, he said. His voice was soft, but it made everything inside me tremble. I chose you. I love you. I cried hard, the kind of crying that doesn't hurt at all. The kind that feels like you've been carrying something heavy for years without realizing it. And suddenly someone lifts it off your shoulders. Jesus didn't tell me to stop. He just held me until the crying faded by itself. When I finally looked up, he wiped my tears with his thumb. His eyes were full of something I still don't know how to describe. Love, yes, but also purpose. Something that told me he had brought me here for more than comfort. And then very gently he said, "Come, there is something I must show you." The peaceful, glowing world around us shifted. Colors folded like pages. The music softened. And right in front of us, something began to appear like gathering in one place, shaping itself into something I didn't understand yet. But I knew one thing. Whatever he was about to show me would change everything. The light in front of me kept growing, stretching wider and brighter until it filled the air like a glowing curtain. I didn't know what it was at first. It didn't look like anything from Earth. It was too alive, like it was breathing. Little waves of gold shimmered through it, rising and falling the same way my chest used to when I slept. I took a tiny step closer, or maybe not a step, just a thought hand. The light rippled as if it noticed me. Jesus put his hand on my shoulder. Even that one touch made everything inside me feel steady and warm, like nothing could ever scare me again. But when he spoke, his voice wasn't soft the way it was before. It wasn't loud either. It was serious. The kind of serious that makes your stomach feel tight even when you don't know why. "Look," he said. The light gathered itself like a sheet being pulled tight, then folded and refolded until shapes began to appear, lines, squares, tiny numbers. At first I didn't understand what I was seeing. It looked familiar, but also not. Then suddenly it clicked. A calendar. But not like the ones my dad keeps on the fridge or on his phone. This one felt alive. Every number shimmered like a tiny star. The months flickered past so quickly I barely had time to read them. January, February, March, each page, glowing then dissolving into the next. I didn't breathe, if I even did breathe here. The pages slowed, then stopped. December. My heart dropped in a way that didn't hurt but felt important. Like when your teacher calls your name and you know something big is coming. The calendar zoomed in so close that all the other months disappeared, and only December floated in front of us, taking up the whole sky. I counted the days out of 1, 2, 3, all the way to 31. But 5 of them were different. They shone brighter than the others. Not just bright, they glowed like golden fire. Like someone had taken sunlight and shaped it into numbers. 202, 12223, 24. Each one felt warm just to look at. Not warm like heat warm, like meaning. Like a secret pressed against my chest. "These 5 days," Jesus said, "will change everything." The words made something inside me shiver. Not from fear. From knowing deep down that the world wasn't ready for whatever this was. I swallowed, even though I didn't need to. What will happen? My voice sounded tiny in the middle of all that golden light. He didn't answer right away. Instead, the calendar shifted again. This time the days didn't flip past. They stretched like windows being pulled open. The number 20 grew larger and larger until it filled my whole view. I wasn't looking at a number anymore. I was inside it. I gasped. Because suddenly, I was above the world. Not flying, just seeing. The entire planet floated beneath me like a small round ornament. Blue oceans, white clouds, tiny glowing spots where cities were. And from the sky higher than lightning, higher than anything I ever imagined, a soft light began to descend. It looked like wind made of gold. It drifted down over people walking in streets, sitting in cars, standing in their kitchens. I saw a man drop his phone and fall to his knees in the middle of a sidewalk. I saw a woman washing dishes freeze, her hands shaking as tears streamed down her face. I saw a teenager stop running at a track field, clutch his chest as if something invisible had touched him. "What is happening to them?" I asked. Jesus stood beside me, not above the world, not below it, but somehow everywhere at once. "On this day," he said, "I will touch their hearts, all of them. They will feel me, even those who do not know me, even those who deny me." I watched as people cried without knowing why. Some reached toward the sky, some tried to ignore it, wiping their eyes angrily. Others fell to their knees right where they were, on sidewalks, in stores, in office buildings, as if something deep inside them finally woke up after sleeping too long. My chest tightened, like I wanted to cry too. The golden light dimmed and pulled back, and suddenly I was looking at the calendar again. The number 21 pulsed softly, as if it were waiting. "Each day builds upon the last," Jesus said, "and the world will have to choose." I felt small, smaller than ever, smaller than 7 years old. Why are you showing me this?" I whispered. Jesus knelt so his face was level with mine. His eyes didn't scare me. They made me feel seen. Completely seen. "Because you will remember," he said. "Because children understand truth without trying to twist it. Because you will tell them what you saw." I looked at the glowing days 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and they seemed to look back at me, like tiny suns waiting to rise. "What about the other days?" I asked. "What happens next?" His expression changed. Not sad, not angry, just heavy, like the sky before a storm. "I will show you each one," he said softly. "But you must stay close to me." I nodded, even though everything inside me was trembling. Not from fear of him, from fear of what those shining days meant for people like my dad, for people who didn't know anything was coming. Jesus placed his hand over my heart, not the glowing one in this world, but the real one, the one lying still on a hospital bed, and warmth flowed through me like a promise. The calendar shimmered. The number 21 began to open, and I knew just from the way the light shifted that the next thing he showed me would be heavier, deeper, and bigger than anything I had seen so far. The number 21 didn't just light up, it thumped, like a tiny golden heartbeat on the calendar. With every pulse, the space around us seemed to lean in, listening. I felt my own, not really their heart, copy the rhythm without meaning to. Then the light stretched again, and just like with the 20th, I wasn't looking at a number anymore. I was inside it. This time I found myself standing, if you could call it that, outside a church. Not one I recognized. Just a building with a cross on top. People walking in holding Bibles, some of them smiling, some of them just looking bored and tired like they'd rather be anywhere else. Inside, the air was thick, not just with sound music, talking, footsteps, but with something I couldn't see and still felt, like the room was holding its breath. A man stood at the front, preaching, his voice loud, his hands moving, words spilling out. But I noticed something strange. There was light in the room, not from lamps. It came in through the door, the windows, from cracks that shouldn't even let light through. It moved like a mist made of gold, gentle and quiet. When it touched people, they started to tremble. Some stopped singing, some dropped to their knees. One woman put her face in her hands and sobbed like her heart had been waiting years to finally break. On one side, a man turned to his wife. He grabbed her hands, his lips shaking. I couldn't hear all the words, but I knew what they meant. "I'm sorry. Forgive me," she cried. Then they fell into each other's arms. The light wrapped around them like a blanket. "These are the ones who open their hearts," Jesus said beside me. "They will be changed. They will let me break their pride, their bitterness, their sin." In the back, an old lady in a wheelchair suddenly stood up, not slowly, not with effort. She stood like she just remembered she could. Her eyes went wide, then filled with tears. A man near her, who had cloudy eyes, blinked and blinked and then his face lit up as if the whole world had come into focus for the first time. The church erupted. Some shouted, some whispered, some just fell on their faces, arms spread wide, as if they couldn't stand under the weight of the love pressing down on them. I wanted to stay there, but the scene slid sideways like someone turning a page. Another church appeared, bigger, fancier. Colored lights washed over the stage. Loud music pounded. The crowd jumped and clapped, phones held high, recording everything. The pastor at the front had a perfect smile, perfect hair, perfect words. But as I looked, I noticed something missing. The light. It stayed outside, pressed against the doors and windows, but not going in. People laughed, snapped selfies, checked their messages in the middle of the songs. The band got louder, the lights got brighter, but it was just noise. My stomach sank. "Why doesn't the light go in?" I asked. Jesus' face was sad in a way that made my chest hurt. "Because they don't want me," he said quietly. "They want the feeling of me. They want the show, but not surrender." I watched as leaders in some places stepped into the light and crumbled, confessing things they'd hidden for years. Lies, greed, secret sins. Some were forgiven, their faces washed clean by tears. Others turned away, angry, their hearts hardening like stone. Then the scene changed again. This time I saw living rooms, bedrooms, buses, sidewalks. People who didn't go to church at all, people who had never prayed, suddenly sitting up in the middle of the night with tears running down their faces. A man in a small apartment clutched his chest as a presence filled the room. A woman at her work desk froze, her eyes staring at nothing while everything inside her shook. I saw Jesus. One of them whispered to a friend, trembling, "He's real." Some believed them. Some laughed. Some were scared and didn't know what to do with what they had just seen. "The division begins," Jesus said, "between those who love my name and those who only use it. Between those who truly seek me and those who pretend." The calendar flickered back into view. Now the 22nd was pulsing, brighter than before, as if the days themselves were waking up. When it opened, the world beneath us shuddered. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then buildings shook, plates rattled in cupboards. People grabbed onto tables and doorways as everything around them trembled. News screens blinked to life anchors with serious faces saying words like unprecedented and no explanation. Maps showed places lighting up red where earthquakes had never been before. "What's happening?" I whispered. "On this day," Jesus said, "creation will groan. The earth will respond to what is happening in the hearts of people." In one city, a tall building crumbled like it was made of sand. Dust filled the air. People screamed and ran. And yet, right in the middle of the destruction, there was one small house still standing, not a crack in its walls, not a broken window. Inside, a family knelt on the floor, hands lifted, tears on their faces. "Thank you, God," the father cried. "Thank you for saving us." Neighbors stood outside, staring at the untouched house with open mouths. "How?" they whispered. "How did nothing happen to you?" "It was God," the family said. "He protected us." Belief sparked in their eyes, like little candles being lit one after another. Then I saw children. In a schoolyard, a little boy stopped playing and looked up at the sky. His eyes went wide. "Do you see him?" he asked his friend. "The shining man." His friend squinted. "I don't see anything," but the boy waved excitedly, and as I looked, I saw him too, a huge angel, bright as lightning and soft as moonlight, standing over the playground with wings that seemed to stretch forever. In another place, a tiny girl ran across a park and wrapped her arms around something invisible, at least invisible to the adults. To me, it was a towering angel who bent down and lifted her with one hand. The girl laughed, her feet dangling in the air. Her mother screamed, seeing her child floating with nothing holding her. "The shining man says God loves you," the girl shouted, giggling, "and you don't have to be afraid anymore." The mother dropped to her knees and sobbed, her fear melting into something else, something bright and trembling and hopeful. But not all parents believed. Some dragged their children away, telling them to stop making things up. Some took them to doctors, to therapists, to anyone who would give them a normal explanation. And every time that happened, I felt something in my chest twist. Children will be my witnesses, Jesus said, because they believe without demanding proof. Many adults will have to choose to trust what their children see, or to call it imagination. The 23rd pulsed. This time, the light that opened wasn't gentle. It was sharp, like a blade cutting straight through the world. I saw men in prison cells staring at the ceiling, hollow-eyed and numb. Suddenly, the walls filled with a glow only they could see. Jesus appeared in those tiny rooms without opening any doors. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse. He just looked at them. One man, covered in tattoos, dropped to the floor and clutched his head, sobbing. "I'm a monster," he cried. "I've hurt so many people. Forgive me." "You are forgiven," Jesus said. And the words hit him like a wave, washing his darkness away from the inside out. I saw gang members on street corners, weapons in their hands, suddenly fall to their knees, their hearts breaking under a weight they didn't understand. I saw rich people in shiny suits stop in the middle of important meetings, their eyes going distant as visions opened before them. Some were on live TV, giving speeches, when they froze mid-sentence and dropped to the floor crying, confessing everything as cameras kept rolling and the whole world watched. Social media exploded. People called it madness, mass hysteria, brainwashing. Others whispered, "What if it's God?" Atheists who had spent their whole lives saying there is no God found themselves face to face with the one they said didn't exist. Some screamed, some fainted, some simply fell silent as tears streamed down their faces. A few minutes later, those same people were out in the streets telling anyone who would listen that Jesus was real. The harvest, Jesus said, will be great. Many will come, more than churches can hold. They will gather in homes, on streets, in fields. They will sing, they will pray, they will testify, and my presence will be strong among them. The 24th glowed so bright it almost hurt to look at. When it opened, everything inside me knew. This day was different, bigger, final. I saw Jerusalem, golden under the sun. Then a burst not like a bomb, not fire, but an explosion of glory. Light shot up from the ground, a pillar of gold that pierced the sky and then poured outward, racing across mountains, oceans, continents. It rushed over cities and villages and tiny towns, touching every place on earth. Wherever the light passed, people changed. Those who loved it began to shine, not just inside but outside. Their skin glowed with a soft radiance, like there was a light bulb under their ribs. They looked at each other, shocked, joyful, afraid and happy, all at once. "What's happening to us?" they asked. "These are mine," Jesus said. They chose the light, and now the light is in them, visible to everyone. But others turned away. The light hit them, and they flinched like it burned, even though it didn't. Their presence grew heavy, shadowed. They gathered together, far from those who glowed. They didn't want to be near them. Being close to the light hurt too much. The world split. You could look at someone and know, without any doubt, which side they were on. And then came the anger. Those who hated the light turned against those who carried it. They made plans, they wrote laws, they whispered about shutting down churches, arresting preachers, silencing anyone who dared to speak the name of Jesus in public. I saw people with glowing faces being dragged away, pushed into dark buildings, locked behind bars. Some were beaten, some were threatened, some were killed. But they didn't fight back. They sang, they prayed, they forgave the very people who hurt them. The 24th, Jesus said, his voice deep and full of sorrow and hope at the same time, is the beginning of the end. After these days, the world will never be the same. No one will be able to say they were not warned. Not after this, not after the signs, the dreams, the visions, and the message I am giving to you. I stared at the glowing calendar, at the 5 days that now felt like 5 doors about to be thrown open. And for the first time since I arrived in that beautiful place, I felt something I didn't want to feel. I was afraid for the people still on earth. When the last of the light from the 24th faded back into the calendar, I thought it was over. I thought that was everything. But Jesus wasn't finished. The glowing days stayed in front of us like 5 shining marks on the story of the world. And I felt something building in the air, like the moment right before thunder. "Now," he said quietly, "you need to understand what comes after." The calendar didn't open this time. It dissolved like smoke, like mist touched by wind. Instead of numbers, I was suddenly standing in the middle of the world after those days, like I had stepped into the next chapter. The split was still there, clearer even. I saw people who shone with that gentle light. They weren't perfect. Their clothes were worn, some of them looked tired, some of them had bruises, but their eyes were bright. In their neighborhoods, people shared food, opened their doors to each other, prayed together in small circles on living room floors, and in backyards with folding chairs. They weren't rich, they weren't powerful, but there was a warmth around them that felt like the place I had just come from. In one small house, a woman knelt beside a sick child. The girl's skin was pale, her eyes were half closed. The woman's hands shook as she prayed. "Please, Jesus, please." The room filled with that same golden presence I had seen in the church. The little girl took a breath, then another, deeper. Her eyes opened wide. She sat up, smiling weakly. The mother cried and laughed at the same time, hugging her. "See," Jesus said softly, "I will care for my own." I saw a man open his front door and find bags of groceries, still cold, sitting on the porch. No one in the street claimed them, no one had knocked. He fell to his knees right there, whispering thank you over and over as tears dropped on the concrete. I knew, somehow, that angels had placed the food there, but the other side was different. People who carried no light in their faces walked past each other with hard eyes, shoulders tense, mouths pulled into angry lines. They whispered in offices. They met in big rooms with long tables. They wrote laws that sounded nice on the outside but had sharp teeth hidden inside. I saw signs go up, no public prayer, no religious gatherings without approval. Speech that offends the new unity will not be tolerated. The words looked tidy, but they tasted bitter. They will say it is for peace, Jesus said, but it is to silence the light. I watched glowing people being taken away. Some were dragged from their homes, others arrested in the street while they prayed for strangers. Their families cried. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. The ones being taken didn't fight. Some of them sang softly. Some smiled with wet cheeks. One young woman looked up at the sky as they shoved her into a van and whispered, "I'll see you soon." It hurt to watch. Why? I blurted out. Why do you let them hurt the ones who love you? Jesus' eyes were sad, but there was a strange kind of joy inside the sadness. They are not losing, he said. They are coming home. They will wake up where you woke up. But while they are still there, their courage will touch hearts that words alone could never reach. As he spoke, I saw it. Guards in prisons secretly listening to the songs of the glowing prisoners. Tears slipping down their faces in the dark. Officials reading reports about strange peace among those being punished. Children watching their parents stand firm and deciding quietly in their hearts that they wanted that kind of love too. After these 5 days, Jesus continued, the world enters a new time, the time of separation, the time of the final harvest. What is written will unfold more quickly. Many will be afraid. Many will be confused. But those who walk with me will never walk alone. I didn't understand everything. I'm only 7. There were words and ideas that felt too big for my small mind, but I understood enough to feel my stomach twist. Will my dad be there? I asked, my voice shaking. On the side with the light, Jesus looked at me with such kindness that it hurt. I am already knocking on his heart, he said, just as I will knock on many hearts. That is why you must go back. That is why you must tell him. Tell them all. The scenes faded. The two sides, the laws, the songs in the dark, all of it slipped away until there was only him and me again. Standing in that place where music was love and colors were alive, my chest felt tight. I don't want to go back, I whispered. I grabbed his hand with both of mine. Please, let me stay here. I feel safe here. I feel whole. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made my throat sting. I know, he said softly. I know you want to stay, but your mission is not finished yet. You still have something very important to do. When it is done, you will return. And then you will stay with me forever, I promise. Promises from Jesus feel different than promises from anyone else. They feel like they've already happened, like time just has to catch up, but it still hurt. A big, deep hurt that made my eyes fill with tears again. He pulled me into one last hug. I pressed my face into his chest and listened not to a heartbeat, but to something deeper, like the sound of eternity breathing. Be strong and courageous, he said, his voice echoing through everything I was. I am with you always. Then it started. The pull, not rough, not mean, just steady, strong like a rope tied to my chest, gently tugging me backwards. I tried to hold on tighter, but my fingers slipped through his hand like light. The music grew softer, the colors dimmed. The ground door, whatever was beneath me, fell away. The tunnel reappeared, but now I was moving down instead of up. Faster and faster. That elevator feeling slammed into my stomach again. Weight came back. Pressure, noise, far away at first, then closer voices, beeping, hurried footsteps. I felt fingers, toes, a chest that hurt like it had been asleep for a long time and was trying to wake up all at once. I heard my dad's voice, broken and raw. Come back, please, come back to me. My heart jerked once, twice. Then it started beating, slow and heavy and real. I gasped. Air rushed into my lungs like water bursting into an empty room. My eyes flew open to bright white hospital lights that didn't feel anything like the light I had just left. People shouted, "He's back, he's breathing." Hands moved over me, checking, poking, measuring. I turned my head, and there he was, my dad. His face was wet. He looked older than I remembered, even though it had only been minutes. When our eyes met, something in him broke open. He laughed and cried at the same time, leaning over to hug me so tight I could barely breathe, but I didn't care. I hugged him back as best I could with my weak arms. "You came back," he kept saying. "Thank God you came back." Later, when the doctors left and the machines quieted down, he sat on the edge of the bed and took my hand in both of his. "What happened?" he asked, his voice shaky but calm. "Where did you go?" I took a deep breath. I looked at him, and I started to talk. I told him about the tunnel, the light, the river like liquid crystal, the people who glowed, the flowers that danced. I told him about Jesus, how he looked, how he sounded, how it felt to be held by him. I told him about the calendar made of living light, the 5 days in December, the things that would happen on the 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. I told him about the churches, the earthquakes, the angels, the harvest, the division, the beginning of the end. His face went from confused to afraid to something else, something softer. When I finished, my voice was small and tired. It was more real than this, I whispered. More real than the bed, more real than this room. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at me, eyes shiny. Then he squeezed my hand and said the words I was secretly scared he would never say. I believe you. I cried again. But this time it was from relief. From knowing I wasn't alone in this huge thing. In the days after that, more pieces came back, details. Jesus had shown me that I hadn't noticed the first time. Places, faces. I told my dad everything, and he wrote it all down in a notebook, page after page. If this is true, he said quietly, the world needs to know. I'm just a kid. I like video games. I hate broccoli. I'm scared of thunderstorms sometimes. I don't know how to warn a whole planet. I don't know if people will laugh at me, or call me crazy, or turn the video off after 5 seconds. But I know what I saw. I know who held me. I know what he showed me about the days that are coming. So I'm doing what he asked. I'm telling you, if you're listening to this, it's not an accident. Maybe you're curious. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you don't believe in God at all. That's okay. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just here to tell you what I saw, the way a 7-year-old can. With simple words and a heart that still remembers what it felt like to stand in that light. Those 5 days in December will come whether you believe me or not. On those days, your heart will feel something, maybe a tightness, maybe a strange sadness, maybe a longing you can't explain. Don't ignore it. Don't push it away. That might be Jesus knocking, like he said he would, calling you, inviting you. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know all the right prayers. You don't have to fix your whole life in one moment. You just have to do one simple thing. Turn toward the light. When you feel that gentle pull, say even in a whisper, Jesus, if this is really you, I don't want to miss you. I choose you. Help me. He hears that, even if you're in your car, even if you're washing dishes, even if you're lying in bed in the dark, hoping nobody hears you cry. I'm 7, and I died for 4 minutes. I saw something I can't forget. I came back with a message, and even if my voice shakes, I'm giving it to you now. Because I don't want you to be afraid when the days come. I want you to be ready. I want you to shine.